Infancy and childhood, cognitive development. If you've ever spent time around young children, you know that they tend to ask a lot of questions and that they find some interesting explanations for how they think the world works. As their cognition develops, they're continually experiencing new ways of thinking, remembering, understanding, communicating, and solving problems. Cognitive development throughout childhood involves steadily building up all of these mental abilities. And as their cognition expands, children can begin to think in more complex, abstract ways. Theory of mind. One of the most important cognitive abilities that begins in early childhood is the development of a Theory of mind. Theory of mind is the understanding that other people have different thoughts, perspectives, and intentions than you
Hi, how
do.
are you?
In essence, it is the understanding that everyone you encounter is an individual with their own personalities, thoughts, wants, and needs. To develop this understanding, a child first has to develop a sense of self and the knowledge that oneself is separate from others. From birth, infants love to look in mirrors, but do they know that the face in the mirror is their own? Psychologists came up with a simple way to test this by painting a dot on an infant's nose with lipstick, placing them in front of a mirror, and observing their reaction. Gallup, 1970, Lewis and Brooks Gunn, 1979. If the baby touches their own nose while looking at the reflection, then they understand that the face in the mirror is their own. If they do not, then they are still working on developing self-recognition, an important precursor to theory of mind. Self-recognition typically begins to occur between 12 and 14 months of age. Even children raised without mirrors in their homes demonstrate self-recognition around this same time. However, some cross-cultural studies note that children whose parents and cultures emphasize collective thinking tend to develop self-recognition a little later than children raised in more individualistic cultures. Roche et al., 2011. Key idea theory of mind is a crucial step in developing skills related to empathy and interpersonal problem solving. As adults, it's obvious to us that other people have thoughts, feelings, and individual personalities. We take for granted the ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and consider their points of view. But for children, theory of mind is a crucial step in developing skills related to empathy and interpersonal problem solving. And that means that theory of mind isn't just a major part of cognitive development, but of emotional and social development too. Theory of mind shows how interconnected many different aspects of development can be. For instance, as our cognitive skills grow stronger, so too does our emotional and interpersonal intelligence. Two multiple choice questions.
What is theory of mind? So one of the most important concepts that we will teach at the beginning of channel is the development of the theory of mind. Theory of mind is the understanding that other people have different thoughts, perspectives, and intentions than you do. So the question is, what is theory of mind? The idea that all of the matter and energy in the universe is really divine thought. The understanding that other people have their own thoughts so about the understanding that other people have their own thoughts and experience. Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. Goodbye. At which point do children develop self-recognition? So, as an adult, self-recognition typically begins to occur 12 to 14 months.
At which point do children develop self-recognition? Piaget's theory of cognitive development.
Oh, hi!
Jean Piaget was a Swiss psychologist who was instrumental in helping us understand that children don't just know less than adults, but also that they truly think differently than adults. Piaget argued that age-related schemas drive cognitive development. Key idea generally speaking, Piaget believed that as we age, our schemas grow increasingly more complex, logical, and abstract. You may already know that we can have schemas for concepts and actions, such as ordering in restaurants, or schemas for objects or places. For instance, when you think of a house, a simple image of a house with a peaked roof and paned windows probably comes to mind. Even if you've never lived in a house that looks like your schema for house. But in Piaget's use of the term, schemas can be both mental and physical ways of organizing or acting upon information. Piaget believed that children could build on their existing schemas by sorting objects, working backward through problems, or repeatedly testing hypotheses. Generally speaking, Piaget believed that as we age, our schemas grow increasingly more complex, logical, and abstract. Developing schemas. According to Piaget's theory, we develop schemas in two ways, through assimilation and accommodation. When we interpret new experiences based on our current ways of thinking, assimilation has occurred. In these instances, we use an existing schema to understand a concept or solve a problem, adding new information to what we already know and understand. When this new information doesn't align with what we already know, accommodation occurs. In these instances, we have to change or accommodate our schemas based on new information. Consider this example. 2-year-old Aisha has a well-developed schema for dog since she lives with a small beagle and a Labrador retriever. Aisha frequently encounters other dogs in her family's neighborhood. She started to understand that dogs come in different shapes, sizes, and colors, and she knows, based on her own experiences, that dogs are frequently seen outside. One day, while on a drive through a rural area with her family, Aisha points to a horse in a pasture and says, "Dog." After all, the horse does have 4 legs and a tail, just like a dog. Aisha has used her dog schema to make sense of the new information she is receiving. Her mother laughs and gently corrects her. "That's a horse, sweetie. See how much bigger it is than a dog? And it's eating hay." Aisha considers her mother's explanation while looking at the horse and updates her dog schema to include smaller than a horse and doesn't eat hay. At the same time, Aisha begins to develop a new schema for horse. She has used both assimilation and accommodation to do these things. Piaget was adamant that moments like this, moments when children use an incorrect schema to understand something new, are not an indication that the child is unintelligent, but rather that they made the mistake because they are intelligent and actively thinking. This is how we learn and develop cognitively, Piaget argued, by asking questions, comparing what we know to what we're learning, and adapting our thinking and schemas to new information. 2 multiple choice questions.
Which of this is an example of accommodation? According to Piaget's theory, we develop schemas in 2 ways, through assimilation and accommodation. When we interpret new experience based on our current ways of thinking, assimilation has occurred. In this instance, we use an existing schema to understand a concept or solve problems. Adding new information to what we already know and understand. When this new information doesn't align with what we already know, accommodation occurs. In this instance, we have to change or accommodate schemas based on the new information. So, which of these is an example of accommodation? Learning that a flamingo with its pink feathers, black tip, beak, and thin legs is a type of bird. Learning that kittens meow to get their mother's attention, just like babies cry to signal to their caregivers that they need something. Learning that a large yellow vehicle with a boxy shape and many windows is a school bus. Not a car, even though both have wheels. So I will go with A. Learning that the large yellow vehicle with a boxy shape and many windows is a school bus. What is an assimilation? According to Piggy's theory, we develop schemas in two ways to assimilate. Assimilation, accommodation. When we interpret new experience based on our current ways of thinking, assimilation. So developing a new way of thinking to interpret a new experience. Oh shit. So one of these two. Using a similar or current way of thinking to interpret. Conducting extensive research before they.
On the next page, we'll continue looking at some of Piaget's theories about cognitive development. We'll examine its four stages according to Piaget, exploring how children use very different schemas to think about things in each of these stages. Psychologist Jean Piaget believed that children's cognitive development occurs over the course of four distinct stages of mental growth spurts, with each stage representing a distinct change in mental ability. The four stages include the sensory motor stage, the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and the formal operational stage. You'll notice many of these stages use the phrase operation or operational. A mental operation is a way of acting on an idea or problem, a way of imagining it, envisioning the consequences of it, and even reversing one's thinking about it. Hugh's theory of development, then, focuses on how young children develop the ability to perform increasingly sophisticated and abstract mental operations.
Hello.
Let's take a closer look at each stage. The sensorimotor stage. While babies cannot engage in logical or abstract thinking, they do begin to build a surprisingly complex understanding of the world around them. They do this primarily through their senses and their motor movements. Thus, the first stage is called the sensorimotor stage. At first, babies' movements are controlled by reflexes. But as they begin to act with intention and control throughout the first year of their life, they form their first schemas. Think about the fact that infants will put anything into their mouth and attempt to suck on it. This is a kind of schema, and an important one, as it helps them understand what does and doesn't provide food or comfort. When the infant puts a toy in his mouth, he's using assimilation, but if the texture is unpleasant, he'll accommodate his schema to exclude that toy. During the sensory motor stage, children learn that they can operate or have an effect on things in their environment. They can bang on pots to make a sound. They can repeat movements that make their parents laugh. They can crawl toward things they want or away from things they don't like. According to Piaget, however, babies cannot fully imagine the outcomes of their actions without experiencing them, since they don't understand that an object continues to exist when it is out of their sight. But at anywhere between 4 and 8 months of age, babies start to develop object permanence. When fully developed, object permanence leads to the use of symbols, which drastically shifts the way infants think.
What is object? The understanding that things continue to exist when outside. So, object, when fully developed, object permanence leads to the use of symbols during the Hello! The understanding that things continue to exist when out of sight.
Multiple choice question. What is object permanence? The pre-operational stage. Children 2 to 6 years old are in the pre-operational stage. These children can talk and draw, and by the end of this stage, they are learning to read and write. In other words, pre-operational children can use symbols, such as language and images, to mentally represent and understand ideas, but they cannot yet reverse these mental operations. They also don't understand that simply changing the form of an object doesn't always change the mass, volume, or number of the object. Take 2 equal pieces of clay and form one into a ball and flatten the other. A 4-year-old will confidently state that the ball has more clay. Pre-operational children are still developing their theory of mind, so they struggle to think about the world from another person's perspective. Sit across the table from a 2-year-old with a laptop between you so that the screen faces you and ask them what they think you see on your side. Most likely, they'll say you see the logo that is on the back of the laptop facing them rather than the screen. Ask a 3-year-old what they think your favorite movie is, and they'll likely answer with whatever their favorite movie is. This egocentrism seems limiting, but in fact, it's a schema they're using to understand the world as they develop their theory of mind. The concrete operational stage. Children between 7 and 11 years old are in the concrete operational stage. They can use symbols, and if they have a way to clearly experience or physically manipulate something, they are capable of performing operations and reversing those operations too. This ability to perform concrete operations sets the foundation for more abstract thinking and for logical reasoning. Children at this age are capable of both conservation and perspective taking. If you give them the same tests mentioned in the above passage on the pre-operational stage, the test involving the clay and the laptop screen, they'll be able to answer correctly or at least come close in their guesses. However, an abstract or hypothetical question might still easily trip them up. For example, when Piaget asked a group of 9-year-olds where on their bodies they would choose to put a third eye so that they could see more of the world around them, their answers were not very clever. Sheffer, 1988. Most of the children said they put it on their forehead between their other eyes. Not many of them considered placing the third eye in different, potentially more useful places, such as the back of their head. The formal operational stage. In the last stage of cognitive development, children are between the ages of 11 and 17 and are able to perform more complex mental operations. They can think logically about abstract concepts without needing to have direct experience with or concrete examples of those concepts. For instance, a child in the pre-operational stage has no concept of the question, what is the meaning of life? But young teenagers are often preoccupied with this question. In fact, they spend lots of time considering their future and their purpose. Children in the formal operational stage can think logically about hypothetical situations. What will happen if I don't study for this quiz? Thoughtfully combine concepts. For example, using a historical event they learned about in history class as a jumping-off point for a creative writing assignment, and consider multiple variables in problem solving.
According to Piaget, of what development stage can children use symbols and begin to think clearly, to think logically? The children put to 6 years old in the preparational stage, children can talk and draw, and by the end of this stage, they are learning to read, write. In other words, professional children can use symbols such as language, image to mentally represent. So I think it's the perpetual stage.
Piaget's theory about cognitive development occurring in four distinct stages remains very influential in educating. Piaget's theory about cognitive development occurring in four distinct stages remains very influential in education and developmental psychology. On the next page, however, we'll take a look at how well Piaget's ideas stand up to more recent research. Piaget's theory of cognitive development changed the way psychologists understood how children think. Today, we know that infants and children are capable of thought, and that as they grow, they use their senses and motor skills to develop an understanding of themselves and their world. From toddlerhood to adolescence, children don't just become more knowledgeable, they also become capable of different kinds of cognition and problem solving. On this page, we'll take a closer look at what Piaget got right about cognitive development in children and what he overlooked or underestimated. Later research and Piaget's theory. Piaget based his theory on observations of school-aged children in France, but cross-cultural research throughout the 20th century has confirmed that the general order in which cognitive abilities develop holds true. Siegel et al., 1990. And yet, while Piaget was right about the general sequencing of cognitive development, the stages of cognitive development aren't as clear-cut as he suggested. Children's thinking doesn't abruptly change when they reach a certain age. Rather, cognitive skills develop gradually over time. Additionally, the thinking strategies that children apply to different concepts depends on their knowledge of and familiarity with the subject at hand. For example, a child who knows a lot about space and astronomy might be able to think abstractly about what would happen if the moon were to shift closer to the Earth. But that same child might only be able to think concretely about a topic they're less familiar with, such as animals. This shows Piaget's claims about children's limited capacities for abstract thinking and advanced cognition weren't entirely accurate. Piaget also underestimated the ages at which certain cognitive skills appear. For example, Piaget claimed that object permanence, the understanding that out-of-sight objects continue to exist, develops at 8 to 9 months of age. Yet more recent studies have shown that it begins to develop during the first few months of life. 3-month-olds may not be able to move to search for hidden objects, but research increasingly shows that they do understand that unseen objects still exist. S.H. Wang et al., 2004. Similarly, when toddlers and preschoolers engage in imaginative or pretend play, they show a remarkable ability to consider other perspectives and think abstractly, in spite of Piaget's assertion that this kind of thinking doesn't develop until later on, Deloach, 1987. Modern research has added to our understanding of children's cognitive development, but we can still credit Piaget with helping us first appreciate it. Multiple choice question. Which of Piaget's hypotheses is supported by modern research? Vygotsky's theory of cognitive development. Piaget's theory of cognitive development emphasizes how a child changes their own thinking by developing, assimilating, and accommodating their own schemas. While adults may be able to help support this process by providing new experiences and information about the world, Piaget claims that cognition doesn't really occur until the child directly acts on or thinks about the things they encounter in the world around them. What the child comes to think and believe is their own construction, one that allows them to see the world from a unique point of view. This is how siblings who share identical or nearly identical genes and environments develop their own individuality. But according to Soviet psychologist Lev Vygotsky, a child's thinking and understanding are not individually constructed, rather, they are taught by the people and culture that surround the child. Vygotsky's counter theory emphasized social influence on cognitive development. Since he was a psychologist working in Soviet Russia, a society that greatly emphasized the collective over the individual, it makes sense that Vygotsky's work is focused on how cognition and development isn't an individual achievement, but a collective one. Vygotsky argued that children learn language by listening to the adults around them speak. He claimed they rarely learn about complicated subjects, such as history or mathematics, simply by interacting with objects in their environment. There is usually a parent or teacher guiding the conversations and demonstrations about these subjects. In these conversations, the parent or teacher generally tells the child both what to know and how to think about it. But Vygotsky's theory discussed more than the individual versus the collective. According to his perspective, language and conversations are the foundation for cognitive development. Both are so important, he argued, that even adults working on complex, abstract problems often find it useful to brainstorm with other people. He also believed that the large-scale culture the child grows up in influences their thinking too. Language, values, and behavioral norms, Vygotsky's theory suggests, are all cultural tools that influence the way children think. Multiple choice question. How did Lev Vygotsky's theory of childhood development differ from Jean Piaget's theory?
아빠, 아빠. Okay, hold on, cause see Dr. Cabrera.
Now that we've examined some competing theories about the roots of cognitive development in children,
Hi, everybody.
which a child's thinking develops are complex.
Dr. Cabrera is here.
So what happens when children begin the next stage of development and life gets even more complicated? On the pages that follow, we'll take a look at physical, social, and cognitive development throughout the next major developmental stage, adolescence. When you think about physical development in adolescence, it's likely that you immediately think about growth spurts and puberty. But changes taking place throughout the body and brain lead to changes in the way adolescents think, feel, and interact with others. Let's take a closer look. Puberty, genes, and environment. At around age 10, a person's adrenal gland, a part of their endocrine system, releases a surge of hormones that kicks off their transition from childhood to adulthood. Herman Giddings et al., 2012. Biological males and females both experience a rapid growth in height. They both experience changes in their primary sex characteristics as their external genitalia grow, while internal changes to sex organs result in menarche and spermarche. Secondary sex characteristics also
How do you end the workout?
hips widen and their breasts enlarge, and males' voices deepen and their body hair grows darker and thicker. The timing of these physical changes is largely determined by genes, but environment plays a role too. Biological females typically reach puberty a couple of years before biological males. Age at the time of first menstruation is about 12, while age at the time of first ejaculation is about 14. Moreover, modern research shows that biological females throughout the world are starting their periods earlier than previous generations, perhaps due to higher rates of obesity. Ewing et al., 2008. Lee et al., 2013. Similarly, a higher body mass index, BMI, in adolescent biological males has also been found to be associated with earlier spermaceous. Dean et al., 2018. Herman Giddens et al., 2012. Other factors, too, can influence the endocrine system and thus the timing of puberty. Both childhood malnutrition and prenatal exposure to teratogens can delay menstruation. Environmental factors, such as childhood physical and sexual abuse and insecure attachments, can actually cause an earlier menarche by increasing cortisol and DHEA, stress hormones that trigger the release of estrogen and testosterone. These environmental influences may explain observed cultural differences in the onset of puberty. Both biological males and females in industrialized countries tend to begin puberty earlier than those in non-industrialist countries. Multiple choice question. Which of the following suggests that environment plays a role in puberty?
Biological males and females both experience a rapid growth in height during puberty. Okay, I agree with that. Biological males and females in industrialized countries tend to begin. Biological females typically reach puberty a couple of years. No. So I go with this.
The timing of puberty. Does it matter? Despite genetic and environmental influences on when puberty begins, there is a naturally wide range in the ages that biological females develop breasts or get their periods. So does it matter if females reach puberty earlier than previous generations did? One concern is that early puberty is associated with an increased risk for cancer and other diseases, Guru et al., 2021. Meanwhile, at an individual level, early maturation is associated with more immediate negative psychological outcomes and social experiences. Females whose breasts appear earlier than those of their peers are statistically more likely to develop an eating disorder and to be subjected to earlier sexualization. Statistics show that biological females who begin puberty earlier are sexually harassed at a higher rate, and they are also sometimes younger at the time of first intercourse, Graeber, 2013. Meanwhile, biological males who mature earlier may also face some negative outcomes, such as a greater risk of delinquency or alcohol and drug use. Yet early maturing males tend to fare better socially. and face less risk of harassment or sexual abuse than their female peers, Mendel et al., 2010. Therefore, research does seem to show that an earlier onset of puberty may be correlated with greater social risks that might affect an adolescent's physical, social, or cognitive development. Brain development in adolescence. Physical development during adolescence isn't limited to the genitals. The largest sexual organ in the body, the brain, also changes during puberty. Earlier in this chapter, we learned that when we talk about brain development, we're specifically referring to two processes, synaptic pruning and the myelination of axons. These two processes occur in a specific pattern throughout childhood, and the last area to undergo change is the frontal cortex. Just before puberty, the volume of gray matter, cell bodies, and synapses between neurons in the prefrontal cortex peaks. The prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain that's responsible for organization, planning, and decision-making. Blakemore, 2012. Then, during adolescence, this area experiences a synaptic pruning. Unused synapses are erased, which decreases gray matter in the brain. At the same time, increased myelination causes an increase in white matter, or axons and myelin, which speeds up neural communication. These neural changes help teenagers think more quickly and efficiently. They may also explain the cognitive shifts toward abstract and logical thinking in the formal operational stage described by Piaget. However, because the pruning and myelination is not complete until the mid-20s, younger teenagers still tend to struggle with planning and decision-making. Key idea. While higher order thinking capabilities are still developing in the frontal lobes, the limbic system is already fully myelinated by early adolescence. This means that emotional processing occurs much faster than careful decision-making at this stage of life. While higher order thinking capabilities are still developing in the frontal lobes, the limbic system deeper inside the brain is already fully myelinated by early adolescence. This means that emotional processing occurs much faster than careful decision-making at this stage of life. Additionally, the limbic system is flooded with dopamine, making short-term rewards feel more meaningful to teenagers, especially when they're around their friends. Albert and Steinberg, 2011, Wallstrom et al., 2010. As you can imagine, this helps explain some of the behaviors and experiences we associate with the teenage years. Risk-taking, emotional outbursts, and increased reliance on the opinions of peers. But as the frontal lobes develop, adolescents slowly become more capable of regulating both their emotions and their behaviors. Multiple
heard you that